I suppose you could contemporize it, but I don't know that it would be them. I'm not sure it would achieve the Miami Vice level that we had then. For years, fans have asked why a part of the drama series Miami Vice was withheld. It was filmed, edited, and ready to air. You need to tell you what he looks like? He's about as big as that wall. He's ugly, and he looks like a fit. But it was then tucked away. What happened wasn't a mistake. It was a decision fueled by fear and pressure. This wasn't just another crime story. It crossed a line the network wasn't willing to touch. Now listen, this kid just set up to meet. He nearly took a bullet dress back there in the alley. It's Ellis. Ellis. The episode was kept hidden from the public, and no one ever gave an explanation until now. Join us as what could be the reason for such an unexpected decision? How Miami Vice came about. It all started with a strong and unusual idea. Born in the mind of Anthony Yerkovich, he had already won an Emmy for his writing on Hill Street Blues, and his creativity seemed endless. One day, he came across a short but striking newspaper clipping. It said that about 1/3 of all the unreported money in the United States either came from or moved through South Florida. That detail stuck with him. Even while he was still busy writing episodes for Hill Street Blues, he quietly began collecting more stories and facts. He carefully studied the explosion of illegal substance crime in Miami, the intense lifestyle of its people, and the growing number of immigrants flowing into the area. Over time, all those observations began to form something bigger in his mind. He imagined Miami not just as a sunny American city, but as something darker and far more complicated. He saw it as a place where illegal wealth moved freely and where rules were easily bent or broken. The city reminded him of the old Casablanca, a place full of charm and danger, but his version was far more modern, filled with hard substances, money, and chaos. He once described it as a wild place where business had spun out of control, where free enterprise had lost all boundaries. With this rough idea in hand, he eventually took it to NBC. He presented it to network president Brandon Tartikoff. Yerkovich wanted to turn this concept into a TV series, something bold, something daring, and very different. At the same time, Tartikoff had an idea of his own. He had scribbled 2 simple words on a notepad, MTV Cops. That note hinted at a new kind of show, something that mixed music videos with the drama of police work. It would be fast, stylish, and loud, a blend of gritty stories and flashy visuals. The 2 ideas came together naturally. After several months of research, travel, and interviews with real Miami detectives and criminals, Yerkovich wrote a pilot script. At first it was called Gold Coast. Later it was renamed Miami Vice. The new title fit perfectly. It captured the mood and danger of the world Yerkovich was trying to portray. The show stood out from the very beginning. One of its most noticeable features was the way it used music. Instead of background tunes, the show used full rock and pop tracks that took over entire scenes. When the music began, all dialogue stopped. The camera moved differently. The editing became sharper. The visuals seemed almost like high-end music videos. It gave the show a modern, stylish feel that was rare for television at the time. Scenes in nightclubs, street shootouts, or fast-moving car chases were all made more intense by this bold use of sound and image. The setting was just as powerful. The Miami streets, lit with neon full of motion, became characters in their own right. The bright lights and slick cars, especially the sleek black Ferrari, driven by one of the lead characters, made the whole production feel intimidating. But the real power of Miami Vice came from its characters. These were not simple cops in neat uniforms solving crimes by the book. They were deeply flawed, deeply human men. Sonny Crockett, played by Don Johnson, was a detective whose life was falling apart. His marriage had collapsed, and he was struggling to balance duty with loneliness. His partner, Ricardo Tubbs, had recently moved to Miami from New York. He brought with him his own emotional baggage and a different view of the city's problems. Together, they formed a complex team. They chased criminals by day, but wrestled with personal struggles by night. This added a layer of emotional depth that made the show feel more real. Of course, the show didn't hold back on violence or intimate encounters. It pushed boundaries in ways that made some viewers uncomfortable and made others tune in eagerly every week. It showed police raids in brutal detail. It revealed the harsh, exposed reality of Miami streets. One scene set in a strip club went way past what most shows had dared, revealing more skin and more raw behavior than networked TV was used to. The producers knew it was risky, but they believed it was necessary. They wanted the show to feel authentic. The creators had collected hundreds of real articles from Miami newspapers. They had studied real crimes and real victims. They felt strongly that to ignore the raw side of the city would be dishonest. In fact, most of the storylines were inspired by actual events. The show covered crimes that had rocked Miami in real life. It told stories about international illegal substance trade, smuggling weapons into Latin America, and even corrupt police officers involved in theft and taking of lives. Some episodes dug deeper into issues like political violence, global corruption, and controversial American foreign policies. They looked at the scars left by war and the hidden costs of greed. The show did not avoid sensitive topics either. It examined child exploitation, discrimination, the dangers of homophobia, and the rising fear surrounding the AIDS crisis. The writers wanted to reflect the truth of the times, not just entertain. At the same time, they kept the drama personal. The characters weren't superheroes. They were tired, angry, sometimes lost. But they kept going. That struggle made viewers care. These weren't just stories about crime. They were about the emotional weight of fighting crime every day. Miami Vice was more than just a television show. It was a vision brought to life by a writer who noticed the crucial happenings in a place and couldn't stop thinking about it. It blended crime drama with pop culture, music, and emotion in a way that changed what people expected from TV. It made Miami look both dangerous and beautiful. It shocked people, thrilled them, and stayed with them long after the screen went dark. The rise and fall of Miami Vice. In the beginning, Miami Vice felt lighter, almost playful at times. The early episodes often leaned into humor, especially when characters like the wacky police informants, Nugi Lamont, and Izzy Moreno showed up. These two brought comic relief that softened the show's edge, making the stories easier to watch. They often found themselves in odd situations, stumbling into crime scenes with a clumsy charm. Their appearances gave the show a fun rhythm, something viewers could laugh about, even when the main plot involved danger. But as the series moved forward, this mood slowly began to change. The stories gradually turned darker and more serious. Instead of light-hearted moments, the episodes started to focus more on pain, loss, and corruption. The detectives in stylish suits cruising through neon-lit nights now had to face a more brutal reality. Their cases became messier, more tragic. The glamour still lingered in the background. Fancy cars, beautiful locations, expensive clothes. But now it clashed with the sadness and the moral gray areas they constantly navigated. Some episodes ended suddenly. Right after a life is lost or a violent event, there was often no closure, no clear victory. This gave the show a feeling of hopelessness, as if even the heroes could barely keep up with the darkness around them. As Miami Vice continued its 5-year journey on television, these changes became more and more noticeable. In the early seasons, many adjustments were small. For instance, they paid close attention to colors, making sure the backgrounds, props, and even clothes matched perfectly to create a unique visual style. These were subtle shifts, aimed at fine-tuning the look and feel rather than altering the heart of the show. But by the third season, bigger changes began to shape the series. In 1986, something important happened. After the show Knight Rider was canceled, Miami Vice was moved from its usual Friday 10 p.m. slot to an earlier 9 p.m. time. This seemed like a small shift, but it placed the show up against the hugely popular Dallas, a long-standing top 10 series. The result was damaging. Viewers started choosing Dallas over Miami Vice, and ratings dropped sharply. By the end of Season 2, the show had ranked 9th. But by the close of Season 3, it had slipped all the way to number 27. The decline was swift and very concerning. Behind the scenes, changes in leadership also affected the direction of the show. Michael Mann, the creative mind who helped shape Miami Vice in its early seasons, stepped back to focus on a new series called Crime Story. Before leaving, he passed the executive producer role to Dick Wolf, who would later create Law and Order. Wolf brought a new approach to the storytelling. He wanted the episodes to feel current, relevant, pulled from real events. His stories explored topics like the Troubles in Northern Ireland and capital punishment. They were heavier and more politically charged. The show, once known for its stylish villains and cool music, began turning into a serious crime drama focused on social issues. Season 3 reflected this shift in tone and style. Comedy became rare. Even the smallest light moments began to disappear. The once colorful and lively style of the show became more subdued. Music choices were darker, fashion less vibrant, and the tone more serious. The overall mood was different, and many fans who had loved the energy of the first 2 seasons felt alienated. Critics also responded negatively. This prompted the producers to consider a course correction for the 4th season. So Season 4 tried to bring back some of that earlier energy. The episodes became lighter again, occasionally drifting into strange, bizarre territory. There were efforts to recapture the magic of the earlier seasons, but the results were mixed. Viewers didn't respond with the same excitement. Ratings continued to slide, and enthusiasm was unstable. The changes weren't enough to fully restore the show's popularity. As the situation worsened, NBC considered ending the series early, with only a shortened 5th season of 13 episodes. However, they agreed to let the show have one more full season, even though it was clear this would be the last. Season 5, airing in 1988 to 1989, returned to the original 10 p.m. Friday slot, but instead of lightening the tone, it went even darker. The stories became tougher and more intense. Even loyal fans began to feel unsure about the direction. The writing seemed weaker, which wasn't surprising considering the Writers Guild strike in 1988. The strike had delayed and disrupted preparations for the season, leaving the show struggling to find its rhythm again, despite all attempts to revive it. Miami Vice never fully regained the energy and charm of its earlier years. What had started as a stylish, trend-setting crime drama gradually became a shadow of itself, still bold, still ambitious, but weighed down by its own seriousness, controversies, and challenges. The early days of Miami Vice were filled with tension, not just on the screen, but behind the scenes as well. Before the cameras even started rolling, the production faced resistance. The county, unsure of how the show would portray their city, asked for script approval. They didn't want to be part of something unless they had control. They even asked the studio to change the title, remove the word Vice. But Universal stood firm and refused to make changes. They made it clear they would move the entire production to Los Angeles if Miami didn't cooperate. In the end, the city agreed to go along with it. The lure of a major television series was too strong to ignore. When the show began, it didn't take long for it to stir up controversy. Critics were quick to point out its obsession with illegal substances and corrupt cops. They complained about the dramatic storylines and claimed the show favored flashy visuals over real substance. It seemed like every week was another episode about illicit substances, cartels, or crooked officers. Some believed it was all too exaggerated, too dramatic to reflect reality. Others saw it as a stylish cover for violent content. Meanwhile, the visuals didn't help change that opinion. The show was sleek and polished, with pastel suits, shiny cars, and neon backdrops. The violence was wrapped in beautiful cinematography, making the dark stories feel like music videos rather than police dramas. Critics argued that the show cared more about style than storytelling. The characters often felt flat, they said, and the plots didn't always make sense. Civic leaders in Miami had their own concerns. The series showed the city as a place drowning in crime. It wasn't the image they wanted to broadcast across the country, but those objections didn't last long. With each episode reportedly bringing around $1 million into the local economy, opinions began to shift. The tourism boom sparked by the show was hard to deny. Hotels, restaurants, and shops benefited as visitors arrived, drawn in by the show's exotic portrayal of Miami. Even if the city looked dangerous on TV, it looked exciting too. That excitement helped fill planes and hotel rooms. Despite the backlash, some law enforcement professionals quietly supported the show. They recognized that it wasn't far off from the truth. Illegal substances were flooding cities, and not just Miami. This wasn't just a local problem, it was a national crisis, slowly coming into focus. While politicians were still catching up, the show was already pushing that conversation into living rooms across America. Michael Mann and Anthony Yerkovich, the creators behind the series, seemed to understand that the world was changing fast. They saw how vice units were shifting more resources into tackling the substance trade. They saw that the problem wasn't just about small-time criminals, it went deeper, reaching into police departments and political offices. The stories they told, often criticized as too far-fetched, were inspired by things already happening in real life. In fact, some Miami cops told Mann that the show didn't even come close to capturing the real chaos on the streets. One of the most overlooked aspects of the show was how it tackled serious political topics beneath its glossy surface. By the mid-1980s, even Miami's own police chief admitted that a large chunk of his officers were involved in corrupt practices. Miami Vice was holding up a mirror to a very real and uncomfortable truth. It may have looked like pure entertainment, but it was also a warning. However, as the show moved toward its end, its impact was undeniable. In May 1989, NBC aired the grand finale, a 2-hour episode called Free Fall. It was marketed as the official ending, but the story didn't quite stop there. 3 more episodes, World of Trouble, Miracle Man, and Leap of Faith, hadn't been broadcast during the regular season. These so-called lost episodes finally appeared during the summer reruns. Then, in 1990, a 4th episode titled Too Much Too Late aired for the first time on the USA Network. Over time, all of these episodes were folded into syndication, showing up alongside the rest of the 5th season. In the years since the show ended, people continue to debate what Miami Vice truly meant. Was it more about the location or about the crimes? Was it just a stylish TV series or something deeper? One thing is clear. It arrived before most people were ready to admit how serious the crisis had become. It dared to show the darker side of a city filled with sunlight. It blended fiction and truth in a way that left a mark, not just on television, but on the culture. The contract dispute that almost crashed the show. In 1984, when Miami Vice appeared on television, it changed everything. The show hit the screens, and people immediately noticed it was not like anything they had seen before. It wasn't just another police show with the same old stories. It was bold, stylish, and different. The show had a look and feel that made it stand out. And soon it became one of the most talked about programs of the decade. Over time, it grew into a major symbol of the 1980s, and its impact never really faded. The story followed two undercover detectives working in Miami, one of the busiest and most dangerous cities in the country at the time. Sonny Crockett and Ricardo Tubbs went after illegal substances, traders, and criminals, often going deep undercover and taking big risks. They didn't wear regular uniforms or drive police cars. Instead, they wore designer clothes, drove fast cars, and lived like the people they were chasing. But they never forgot who they were or why they did the job. That made the show exciting and gave it a sharp edge. Before all of that could happen, though, the show had to find the right people to play its main characters. Casting Sonny Crockett was not easy. Many famous actors were considered. Nick Nolte and Jeff Bridges were thought of early on. But in those days, big movie stars didn't usually want to do television. Mickey Rourke was offered the role, but he said no. Larry Wilcox, who had played a cop on another show, was also passed over. It seemed no one quite fit the part. As a result, the pilot episode was delayed twice while the search continued. Eventually, Don Johnson and Philip Michael Thomas were chosen to play the lead roles. Johnson was not a big star at the time. In fact, he had been part of several failed shows before this one. Choosing him was a gamble. Thomas was newer to audiences too. But once they got in front of the camera together, something just clicked. They had a connection that brought the characters to life. And viewers felt it. Their friendship and teamwork made the stories feel real and kept people coming back week after week. In the pilot episode, Jimmy Smits played Crockett's partner. But that role didn't last. His character was ended off early to make way for Thomas's Ricardo Tubbs. From then on, it was all about Crockett and Tubbs and their fight to clean up the streets of Miami. But the drama didn't stop when the cameras did. There were problems behind the scenes too, and not everything ran smoothly. After 2 strong seasons, trouble started brewing. Don Johnson wasn't happy with his salary. At first he was making about $30,000 per episode, but he believed he deserved more. He wanted somewhere between $100,000 and $150,000 per episode. The talks didn't go well, and soon Johnson stopped showing up to the set. Filming had already begun, but he wasn't there. The network even considered replacing him with Mark Harmon, who had recently left another show. Johnson had even promised country singer Willie Nelson a role in the season opener, but his absence left Nelson waiting on set with nothing to do. While Johnson was said to be in Europe, his agent was nowhere to be found, making the situation even harder to manage. Universal, the studio behind the show, tried to film around Johnson for a while, but it didn't work. They finally had to shut everything down. Executives at NBC tried to stay calm. The chairman said Johnson was a big part of the show's success and still hoped things would work out. The network didn't want to give in too quickly either, especially at a time when rising actor salaries were starting to hurt their profits. But in the end, the problem was solved. Johnson returned, signed a new contract, and stayed with the show until the very last episode. Details of the deal were not shared, but the important thing was that he was back. Miami Vice did more than entertain viewers. It helped launch careers. Don Johnson became a major star. Philip Michael Thomas gained fame as well. And it wasn't just the actors who benefited. Musicians who had their songs featured on the show saw huge boosts in sales. Artists like Phil Collins and Glenn Frey reached even bigger audiences because of their connection to the show. Some of them even appeared in episodes. At a time when television and music usually stayed separate, Miami Vice brought them together in a fresh and exciting way. Setting a new standard, Miami Vice was more than just another crime show. It changed how television looked, sounded, and felt in the 1980s. While the show followed detectives chasing criminals, it wasn't only about crime. There was a deep feeling of frustration that ran through the stories. The detectives worked hard to stop substance trade and prostitution. But no matter how many criminals they arrested, new ones kept appearing. It was like trying to hold back a wave with bare hands. Every episode showed a new battle, often ending in gunfire, with many lives lost before justice could take its course. The detectives did their jobs, but there was always a sense that their fight was never going to end. Refugees from Cuba and Central America had created new communities, and crime kept growing fast. Illegal substances were being smuggled in, and an entire economy had developed around them. There were people laundering money, lawyers defending smugglers, and bail bondsmen ready to help them out of jail. Everything seemed driven by profit, no matter the cost. The city was wild, almost lawless, like something from another time. The style of Miami Vice set it apart from other shows. Early episodes looked like standard police dramas, but that changed quickly. The producers leaned into bold colors, unusual camera work, and a strong visual theme. Executive producer Michael Mann made it clear, no dull or earthy tones were allowed. The show was going to reflect the flashy electric side of the 1980s. Neon lights, sharp shadows, and sleek buildings filled the screen. Everything was polished, from the cars to the clothes. Music played a huge role, too. The soundtrack embraced the new wave culture of the time, adding energy and emotion to every scene. Miami Vice was one of the first network shows to be broadcast entirely in stereo, which made the music stand out even more. Viewers didn't just watch the show. They felt it. Every episode had the energy of a music video combined with the tension of a crime story. It was expensive to make, with each episode costing around $2 million. But the investment paid off. The show became a cultural phenomenon. Originally, the producers thought about filming in Los Angeles, but that changed, and they decided to shoot on location in Miami. The city added a raw, real feeling to the show. Many scenes were filmed in South Beach, which at the time was a neglected part of town. Poverty and crime had taken over the area. Streets were often empty, and some buildings were in such bad shape that the crew had to paint them before filming. Still, the show captured something beautiful in the decay. As Miami Vice gained popularity, it helped bring attention to the city's architecture. The pastel-colored Art Deco buildings became iconic, and people began to see their value. A wave of support grew for saving these old buildings, and by the early 1990s, many of them had been restored. Hotels were renovated, tourists started coming, and South Beach slowly transformed into one of the most popular spots in Florida. The show had a real effect on the city it portrayed. Besides Miami Beach, filming also took place in Broward and Palm Beach counties. The variety of locations gave the show a rich, textured look. From fancy yachts to back alleys, the settings helped tell the story of a city torn between glamour and danger. Fashion was another part of the show's identity. Don Johnson's look, T-shirts under pastel jackets, white pants, no socks, and stylish loafers became a trend. Men's fashion across the country began to copy the Miami Vice look. The influence stretched into the early 1990s, with many people adopting the relaxed, sharp style. Ray-Ban sunglasses and rolled-up sleeves became symbols of cool. The show didn't just reflect the 1980s, it helped shape them, and for all it's worth, it captured something very real about America in the 1980s. Miami Vice was bold and different. It broke away from traditional television and created something fresh. With its intense stories, colorful visuals, unforgettable music, and cutting-edge style, it became more than a show. It became a snapshot of a decade, capturing both the darkness and the sparkle of the time. Even after it ended, its influence could still be felt in fashion, music, architecture, and the way people thought about television. Though it only ran for 5 seasons, its impact lasted much longer. After the show ended in 1989, its influence could still be felt in the next wave of television dramas. Crime shows like The Sopranos, 24, and Breaking Bad all used style and mood to make their stories stronger. Even modern video games, especially Grand Theft Auto, Vice City, were clearly inspired by Miami Vice. The colors, music, and characters in those games looked like they came straight from the show. In 2006, a movie version of Miami Vice was made. It was darker and more serious, but it proved that the name still had power. People still remembered the original and were curious to see how it would look on the big screen. Though the film had mixed reviews, it showed that the legacy of the show had not faded. Even now, decades later, people still talk about Miami Vice. It set a new standard for what television could be. Miami Vice will always stand as a bold and lasting piece of television history.